Please welcome Rudy Valdez.
It's not as funny as I remember it being. Sorry, as you can tell, I use humor as a defense mechanism. So it's going to be a hilarious evening.
You're a good brother.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So, Cindy got out 2016, December 2016.
Yes.
Yes, and what's she doing today?
She is mothering the crap out of those kids. You know, she's doing really well. You know, she has sort of a different story than most people coming out of prison. You know, with, first of all, coming out under the Obama clemency, you know, with a lot of fanfare around that. And then the film coming out, and we premiered at Sundance, and you know, she's just had this sort of wild ride, this extended honeymoon of coming home. So, you know, she's doing really well. She got a job immediately. She's had 4 promotions already. She's really taking life by the horns, yeah. And she, you know, but with that said, you know, she hasn't been forced to look at life yet. You know, I think we're still waiting on that, and it's going to come eventually when all of this sort of dies down. And you know, I always say the answer is evolving, because I truly feel like the ramifications of this are long lasting. You know, we're not going to know how it truly affects her or her daughters or the rest of us for another 5 or 10 years. I feel like I said in the film, you know, it's 15 years on paper, but it's a life sentence. You know, it's changed everyone's life. So, but right now, you know, every time I call, it's like a little gem, you know. I'm an emotional basket case too, in case you'll probably figure that out very soon. But I would call when she first got home, and I would say, well, what are you doing? What's going on? First of all, it was emotional for me to be able to call her. That was a big, you know, it was amazing for me to see her in my phone and be able to just reach out to her. And for her to say, I can't talk right now, I'm at Annalise's soccer game, was just, you know, it would blow me away every time. I'd be like, okay, I'll call you later. You know, and I'd let her go. And but you know, she's doing really wonderful. She's taking advantage of this second chance.
Now, had you done any filming before you made this movie?
So it's, you know, I don't know who believes in what here, but like sometimes things just happen, and you can't really explain it. You know, I was an actor prior to this and a writer, and I was actually a kindergarten teacher prior to all this, and I had this sort of crazy comedy writing job as well. All these things were happening, and I was becoming very sort of disenfranchised with the acting world and the comedy world and all these things that I didn't feel like I was represented. I didn't know. All I ever wanted growing up was a voice, and I didn't know what that was going to be. And I happened to fall into this. A couple of the parents of one of my students were documentary filmmakers. They were a husband and wife duo. And they started to say, you know, if you ever want to come on set or check it out, you can come on nights or weekends or whatever. So for about a year, I would just go and watch for a year, right when this was happening. And I had just gone, and I was instinctively already sort of filming the girls, just because I wanted to be able to watch them grow up. And I got an opportunity to work on a series for the Sundance Channel called Brick City, which was about Cory Booker and his attempts to revitalize Newark. And I was there for 3 years, sort of, that was my film school, basically. Mm-hmm. And they all happened at the exact same time, and I quit my teaching career, I quit acting, I quit everything, and I just sort of went head first into this because I started to realize the power of documentary and what it can do. And it was just, you know, I was very lucky. So over the course of 10 years making this film, I became a filmmaker, and I tried to become the best filmmaker that I could be in order to make this film as strong as it could be. And if you watch this film again, maybe you'll watch it again? You can see it, you know, it's deliberate that I didn't try to like smooth things out or make things feel like they were a constant. You know, in the beginning of this, I was chasing this story. I was chasing those girls. I was trying to keep up with what was going on. Around the middle, you see me start to sort of get my bearings as a filmmaker, and by the end, I feel like I'm more in command of the storytelling and what's going on. And you know, over the 10 years, I was fortunate enough to shoot. I became a cinematographer eventually, and I shot films for Sebastian Junger and Robert De Niro and Whoopi Goldberg and Sam Pollard and Geeta Gambhir and you know, all of these people. And they were all my film school. Like I would never tell them that, but I was practicing on their films because I wanted to be able to be as strong as possible with this. So yeah, this is my directing debut, but I've shot a bunch of films in the past.
And so you're continuing to work in film?
Yes, I mean, I hope so, if anyone's hiring.
And so you applied to Sundance?
Yes.
Where 14,000 submissions, and 16, you were in the documentary competition?
Yes.
So there are 14,000 submissions to the festival, 16 slots in the, I mean, it was harder than getting clemency.
Yeah, it truly was. It truly was. And I have a quick little story about that, you know, just to, so, like you said, like for 9.5 years, it was literally just me and a camera making this film. And when Sydney was given clemency, a production company came on and helped me finish the edit. They came on to help me through post, but I remember finding out that we got into Sundance, and I called my mom, and I called my dad, and I told them, and my dad was like, "Oh, that's okay." Like they don't really understand what I do for a living. Like they don't really get it. And I called my mom, and she was like, "Oh, mijo, that's so great. Can we do it in New York?" And I was like, you know, they're kind of hell bent on Park City, but I'll ask. They were stuck in Park City. But then my sister Cindy called my mom and dad and individually and sort of told them what it meant, you know, for this little story to be accepted and put on this platform. And my dad called me and he was crying and he said, "How did you know? You know, how did you know?" And I said, "Dad, I didn't know. I didn't know Cindy was going to get clemency. I didn't know we were going to get into Sundance. I didn't know anyone was ever going to see this film. But what I did know was that we were about to embark on a journey that was going to be the toughest 15 years at the time, toughest 15 years of our life, and I knew that we were going to handle it with poise and grace, and we were going to be proud of how we got through it, and I wanted to capture that." So, you know, back then when I started making this film, I made one promise to my family, that if they were open and honest with me and they allowed me to tell this story, that I would make something good out of it.
Are you Have you looked at any of the other films? There are a few films that have sort of chronicled long periods of time. There's, of course, Boyhood, yes, and also the Michael Apted film, 7 Up. Did you get into those films at all?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly seen those films, and you know, in some ways, the reason that this was my directing debut is because I truly wanted to. I had a vision for this film very early on, in a lot of ways. There are a lot of layers to this film that are on purpose, that as I became a filmmaker, I started to really pay attention to certain things that were going to help me layer this film. And so I knew that the longevity of the film was going to be its strongest asset, along with the intimacy of it. So one of the things that I decided day one of the edit starting, you know, we were sitting down in a production meeting and I said, "Oh, just so you guys know, there's not going to be a single stat card in this film." And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, there won't be one stat card in this film. And they were like, "Well, why?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you why in a couple of months." And they were like, "Okay." And they sort of let me just do what I was going to do. And because I knew the span of time that we had and the what that can mean in there are these stats that you can see there, and this, don't quote me on the stat, but I think it's close to right. The amount of women going to prison since 1987 has risen like 800%. And that's a staggering stat when you think about that, and you think about the children left behind and the families left behind, all those things. And, but I feel like people will read that stat and walk out of the theater and be like, oh, that really sucks. But I knew that if I could show that, people would leave and want to do something about it. When Autumn looks up at the camera and says, hi, my name is Autumn Shank and I'm 13 years old, and you see what the weight of these 9.5 years have done to her.
You can see a huge toll.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to show. That was the stat card.
On her, right. And then there's lovely subtext with the kids all the time, I think, that is so articulate because they're not performing at all. They are just being in the state, and they're pretty good kids that are pretty happy and upbeat. And the tightness of the family around them was so obviously key, and that's also part of the story.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that those kids stayed on track, that they stayed, happy and good and felt connected. And, you played a big role in that because Ryan, of course, bowed out, right?
Yeah, Adam third out. Well, he bowed out in the sense of his marriage to Cindy. But what I will say, and I try to say this every time I do a Q&A, is the only reason that I was able to fight for Cindy, the only reason that I was able to make this film was because of Adam. Was because I never once had to worry about the well-being of those girls or if they were loved and taken care of. Because had I had any inclination that they were suffering or they were doing without, all of my strength would have been there.
Right.
He is an amazing man, an amazing father. He's my brother. And the interesting thing is their divorce probably saved those girls. Because all of a sudden there wasn't this worry about this relationship and trying to keep it together. I mean, it's hard enough to be married when you live in the same house with somebody, let alone, am I right? Let alone with 15 years apart and thousands of miles away or hundreds of miles away. And so what happened was all of that energy and all of that love just focused back on the girls. So they benefited from that. And Adam was adamant about making sure that the girls and Cindy had a relationship. Despite what their differences were, he always made sure that they were available for her and she was available for them if it was ever needed.
And Cindy seemed to appreciate that as well.
Very much, yeah.
Yeah, so a healthy family situation is what saved the lives of these people.
I think so.
And of the girls especially.
I think especially the girls, yeah.
And so, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
For sure. Take a couple questions from the audience. Yes, in the back there.
Follow up on that, your comments just made. Why did you not show any scenes of Adam showing love for the kids after that divorce announcement thing? And why did you not show his new whatever, if you have one, significant other? And the other question is, how high were the phone rates at all these various prisons?
Yeah. So the phone rates are insane. Anybody who knows about the privatized prison complex, it's, I think she was paying at one point up to $7 or $8 for a 15-minute call, depending on where she was. I think it was usually around $4 for a 15-minute call, and you get 300 hours a month max. And because of my father, every single month, for her entire time, she had 300 minutes a month. And that's a good question about Adam. One of the reasons that I didn't really go into that part of it is because, not only with just Adam, but with the situation in general. When you start to peel off the layers of all of the things that are happening with the family, on the legal side, on the personal side, and all these things, this documentary could have really spiraled out and gone into a lot of tangents. And I really needed to focus. I didn't have the bandwidth, the finance to chase every single piece of the pie down. So I made it about sentencing. I made it about those girls and about their relationship with Cindy. And I needed to focus on that because, all of a sudden if I go into Adam and he did remarry, I never wanted to paint him as a villain in any sense of the word. Once he separated from the story of Cindy and the girls in the sense of going to see them, I had to make that decision to just say, okay, now it's about this other struggle for these girls going to see their mother who's incarcerated, because that's a big part of this issue, is when a mother goes to prison, 9 times out of 10, that's not a good fact, but most of the time, the kids end up in a system. The fathers go somewhere else, and we were lucky that he didn't, but I wanted to show that there's difficulty in those relationships, and I wanted to show the strain on those relationships and what that meant. So, and it wasn't necessarily a film about Adam and what he was doing, it was a story about the family and the core family making this fight. So, and I just didn't have the time.
Yes, right here.
You said a few minutes ago that you're a very emotional guy. I'm curious how you were able, over all those years, to balance the role of filmmaker and the role of brother.
That's a great question. So I always tell this little story about that. The first time I was filming with my father and he broke down crying. Everything in my soul, everything in my heart was saying, Rudy, put down the camera. Go and hug your dad. Tell him it's going to be all right. Tell him we're going to make it through this. And then something else started fighting in me. I remember this day like it was yesterday. Something else started fighting in me and it said, Rudy, hold your shot. This is for the greater good. You promised your family you were going to make something good out of this. And this is the hard part. If it was easy, everyone would do it. This is the hard part. So sitting there and holding a shot on my dad crying was one of the most difficult things I've ever done as a filmmaker. It is the most difficult thing I've ever done. So I immediately had to start to compartmentalize my head. And the way I started to do that when things were getting emotional is I literally started going through a list in my head. Do I have enough battery for this scene? Do I have enough cards for this scene? Am I in focus? What is happening? Does the sound okay? What's going on? Do I need to anticipate a move? Who's going here? Who's back here? What's happening? So that was my sacrifice over the course of this decade, was that emotionally I had to detach a little bit from the story in order to capture these moments. And I'm not always successful with that. As you can see, I talk from behind the camera and I lose it the first time somebody puts a camera on me, So that's a wonderful question, and that's how I dealt with it, is I just had to turn it off the best way I could. Just going through the technical things.
Did you take the Nesquik footage?
No, I didn't, no. And that was complete documentary lightning, because the film was cut, and that story of her telling that memory was in it, and it was literally we were waiting for something to render, and I was looking through footage
Of home movies.
of home movies, and that came up. Cindy shot that. Cindy came in and shot all that.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's going in. We're not done. We're not locked. And we had to put it in because you can't
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yes, Jerry.
Can you tell us about the time when you showed this film to your family the first time?
Yeah. So I kept this film under lock and key from everyone. They saw it right before Sundance, right before Christmas. I went home, and they hadn't seen a single frame of anything. I went home, I think it was 2 days before Christmas, and I got them in a little theater, and I said, look, I filmed the worst decade of our life. I cut it down to a manageable 85 minutes. I color corrected it, put some beautiful music under it, and I said, Merry Christmas, and I sort of walked out of the room. And, I literally said that and walked out of the room, and they were just like, what is happening right now? And the sad thing is, this is sort of round 2 of this. Prior to Cindy even going away and any of this happening, as I said, I was an actor, and like most child actors, I had a one-man show. And I wrote this one-man show about my family, because they've really gone through a lot, and it was this one-man show that was broken up into monologues for each of the family members, and again, they had no idea what I just invited them to a theater one night, and before I was like, you guys are either going to love me or you're going to kick a speaker down on the way out, I don't know. But so they knew that where I was coming from, they knew that it was for something bigger, and I was going to tell an honest story, and that they had nothing to be ashamed of. So they love it. I think it took a few times of them watching it to truly, Cindy watched it And she came to Sundance with me and watched every single screening. As you can see, I like walk out. I can't even watch it. I haven't seen it since Sundance. But it was probably around the 7th viewing where she was like, "That's actually a good movie." And I was like, "Thanks, what have you been doing all of this time?" And and she was like, "I'm just absorbing the girls. I'm watching them live. I'm watching." So she was, so for a long time, she was just caught up in the sheer visuals of them growing up before her eyes. And then she finally was like, "There's actually something there." So it's been really positive, I think, for my family. And I think and I hope that it's going to be something that's positive down the line, that they're going to be able to look back on it again in 5 or 10 years and be very, very proud of how we got through this, and hopefully the change that we are able to make with their story.
Did she see a video of the girls while she was in prison?
Never.
No? That wasn't permitted? Or?
No.
Uh-huh. And why did the federal government come back after her after 6 years?
Yep. So I'm sure everyone's asking that question. So in a federal drug case, I don't know if any of you guys are federal criminals, but the only way to lessen your sentence for a federal drug crime is to give information on somebody else. So in 2003, when her ex-boyfriend Alex was murdered, 26 people were sent away immediately, because they were all given information on each other and turning on each other and ratting on each other. 2 people did not go away. My sister and another gentleman named Nathaniel. Because my sister was basically the girlfriend. She was told to leave when things were happening, like she wasn't really around. And Nathaniel was somebody's cousin and just sort of around. He drove cars every now and then. So all of these 26 people will receive 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years in prison. Now you let them sit in prison for 5 years. And then you go to them and you say, "Hey, do you happen to remember anything about these 2? We may be able to lessen your sentence." What do you think everyone is going to say? They're going to say, "Yeah, she was there, he was there, they were doing this, they were doing that," in no fault of their own. They want to get home to their families as well, but that's the way the system is set up to work. And so they paraded people in and basically pointed the finger at her, and all they really needed to do was prove that she was there. It didn't matter what she did. If she was there, living in the house and knowledgeable of the crime, she was put up as though she were Alex because she lived with him. The prosecution at the sentencing requested 89 years for Cindy. The mandatory minimum sentence was 15, and that's what Cindy got.
So only the clemency, she couldn't have gotten out on parole before 15 years.
There is no federal parole.
Uh-huh.
It does not exist.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, how are the kids sharing their time between mom and dad?
Pretty equally. They, again, another credit to Adam. When Cindy came home from prison, they basically let her leave with $43 and nothing else. So she came home with $43, staying with my mom, and the first piece of mail she got was an $800 child support bill. And Adam picked her up himself, drove her to the front of the court, and split custody 50-50. Because he was like, how are you going to come home and get your life together having to pay this much money when you don't even have a job? And they've done, a wonderful job of communicating. And, it's, when I tell you, it's amazing when I go home and visit. My sister still lives with my mom. She has sort of a bigger place. And, Adam will just walk in. He doesn't knock. He just walks in. It's like a big family. And he'll be like, I'll take these 2, you can keep her. And it's just a constant, it's a team effort, And it seems very healthy. Everyone's, happy. And they're getting along really well. So it's I guess technically it's a 50-50 share, but they're kind of just tag teaming it and being the best parents that can be.
Okay, let's take 2 more questions. Yes.
Thank you. I'm grateful that you didn't spend a lot, or any time really, on the legal machinations of her trial and her situation.
Her appeal also, it's sort of, you just mentioned it. And, yeah.
I'm still curious, especially given what you just said about the sentencing. How was the quality of her representation were you and the family satisfied? Was there any chance whatsoever of her being found anything other than guilty?
So, thank you for that. That's
What was the
one-
quality of Cindy's representations, basically?
Yeah, and also as far as the not spending time with it, I say in the film, I didn't want to make this a film about guilt or innocence because it was about the sentencing. But when you talk about the trial, no, she was not represented very well, and that's partly, I would say, the media's fault because when you think about, we had clearly never gone to a federal court for a drug case before as a family, and we didn't know what to expect, and we thought, well, we can't use a public defender because when you see them on TV, they have 40 briefcases and their glasses are to the side and they have 100 cases and they can't keep up with anything, and we really want the best for Cindy. We didn't have a lot of money, but we retained the best lawyer that we could. Somebody came in the 12th hour and said, I have all of this federal experience, I'm willing to help, I think I can really do something with this case. And, suffice to say, at the end of the first day, he was given a book by the judge saying, you need to learn how to address a federal court. And aside from just that, we're sitting in the courtroom and we're saying we need an expert to prove that she has this and this and this and this. And every time we ask for that, it's like, yeah, we can do that. That's going to be another $10,000. That's going to be another $5,000. That's going to be another $10,000. And we clearly didn't have that. And you look across the aisle at the prosecution and there are 3 lawyers at the table. There are 3 lawyers in the first row. There are experts in the second row. They have every resource available to them. How do you fight that? How do you win that? All they really had to prove, like I said, was that she was there. That's it. That's all they had to prove. And she was clearly there.
Okay, Mr. O'Brien.
So, first of all, it's a brilliant film. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful film.
Thank you.
What is the problem? In the film, you mentioned the fact that it's been 30 years of trying to turn this federal law around. What the hell? And is there any light at the end of the tunnel of this movie? Are you trying to get the movie in front of the right people? I mean, how can we change this?
Yeah, so what the hell indeed? It's, there are a lot of layers to it. When you boil down to it, I think the quickest fix to some of this problem is giving judges back the discretion to give sentences that they feel are appropriate. And people always ask, what is my actionable item that I can do for this? And of course, voting is paramount to this. Getting the right people who are in there that understand that these are people, these are families, and that we can't keep throwing people away. When you get to the bottom line, the problem is we as a country are okay with, and I'm sorry if this offends people, but modern day slavery. People are making millions, billions of dollars on the backs of poor people through this prison industrial complex. So we can go out and say that we need to change the vote, we need to swing the states, we need to vote, we need to put all these right people in, and that is true, we do need to do that, but I think just as important as that, we need to have a cultural shift in our country. We need to understand that we can no longer accept that these are our country's values. They've been our values for a very long time. It's just been this shifting way of doing it. But we as a country need to stand up and say that this is not working. And people... One of the things I always try to, I don't want to say correct, but I try to go around is when people say this is a broken system. I think that's part of the mentality is people think, oh, there's this loophole, there's this thing. No, this is not a broken system. This system is working exactly the way it's designed to work. At an alarming rate. And nobody is doing anything about it because too many people are making money.
Including the politicians?
Including the politicians.
Yeah, you mentioned in the film that politicians supposedly have been saying this is not a good thing over and over and over again, but nothing changes.
Right. So I will tell you, again, very purposely, this film is completely apolitical.
Right.
Because in my life, I have found that I'd rather fight for something than against something. And especially going into what our current administration is, I don't care who fixes this problem. I truly don't. It just needs to be fixed. And the first call I got after Sundance, after our premiere, the next day, I got a call from a Republican senator who said, we need to bring this to Capitol Hill. We need to show people. 4 weeks ago, Senator Mike Lee from Utah and Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, in a bipartisan effort, brought this film to Capitol Hill. And we screened it in front of staffers, in front of senators, and it went better than anybody thought it would. In 2 weeks, I'm going back for 4 more screenings. People are asking for this. It's more than just a vote, it's a hearts and mind revolution that we need to have here. We need to be able, for the first time in our country's history, not just say poor them or poor them or poor me, but actually put ourselves in the shoes of other people and know what it means to hurt. Know what it means to not have your mom and dad around. Know what that separation feels like and care. We are our brother's keepers, you know? We need to understand that.
Rudy, thank you so much. This is a wrap for our festival.